You know, I don't even know what to say about this one. Every so often I come across an episode that just makes me speechless. Not angry, not offended, not even ready to laugh at its failures. And if any show could make me feel that way at this point, you know in your heart of hearts that it would be the Fairly OddParents, or Family Guy. We're talking about Fairly OddParents. The year just doesn't feel complete unless I tackle at least one episode from some of my old favorite topics. And I know what you're thinking, but what more could you possibly say about the Fairly OddParents at this point, besides talking about the creator who has done some things, I guess. I think he became a televangelist or something. I don't really follow the news very much.
Weak rhymes with critique. So go ahead and critique away, because all it does is make me stronger.
But yeah, I guess you're right there. I have talked about a lot of different episodes of The Fairly OddParents. I've talked about their endless amount of new characters that made the show worse and worse. I've talked about its seasonal rot, how the humor has curdled like milk. But I've never actually talked about the worst episode of The Fairly OddParents. Lights Out is the worst episode of The Fairly OddParents. I'm not beating around the bush. It's worse than It's a Wishful Life. It's worse than Odd Dog. It's worse than Suitified Super Shitter, or whatever that episode's name was. Honestly, it's an episode that I don't even feel particularly comfortable talking about. It's that bad. And you might be wondering, if it's so bad, what the hell did they do in it? Did they teach some heinous moral like It's a Wishful Life? No. Did they fill it with gross out like Timmy's Secret Wish? No, not that either. Did it annoy the piss out of me? Not really, no. So what the hell did it do then? The episode Lights Out did absolutely nothing. I don't even know why I'm hiding it. So this is the episode. Like, the entire thing. The only thing on screen at any given time is the character's eyes, with little exception. And those exceptions tend to be making Cosmo and Wanda look as disturbing as possible. Yeah, let's just let it sink in. Do I even need to continue this review? I mean, I don't need to explain why this is bad, right? Anyone with a brain can see the problem. Am I being wrong on that? No, John, no. This episode was made by a creative team. There were voice actors and there were, let's call them artists. There were writers, editors, and this whole episode needed a pitch to be brought to network executives, who knew that if this episode turned out badly, it would reflect poorly on them. These people had all been working for years and years in the industry, and probably even had a college education for their respective fields. I mean, it's certainly possible that every single person involved in this was stupid, because the only other explanation is that none of them cared. You know what? I lied. This episode does make me angry, and this does offend me on a very fundamental level. This episode deserves to be played for every animation class ever, because this is the most brazen admission by a creative that I've ever seen, that they do not care about their work. Either that or Mr. Krabs got a hold of the budget and didn't let anyone else get a hold of it.
You'll never get a cent out of me! Never!
Seriously. Who the fuck signed off on this? Can I call it an animated atrocity when this thing is not animated? So, let's explain. Very slowly and very tediously. So, even the densest among us here can understand why you cannot just sign your name on a blank test and hope to get a passing grade. I don't even know whether or not I should comment on the let's be ungodly generous and call it the visuals. I mean, it's incredibly obvious, right? It feels like I'm talking about a goddamn unicorn because it doesn't exist. Or at best, talking about quantum particles because it only exists in theory. I'm sorry, I know that I'm harping on about this, but this is just inexcusable. Fairly OddParents at the time was the second most profitable and popular show on Nickelodeon. And while they didn't even give their most popular shows any kind of special budget, you never see SpongeBob doing any of this shit, not even in its worst seasons. No, you know what? I'm sorry. You don't see indie animation doing this shit with no budget. You know, people who make cartoons and animation that don't have any kind of money. Elephant's Dream, for instance, that was made entirely on open source software. Money isn't an excuse. Can you imagine anyone struggling to try and get to the industry, working every single day to hone their craft, trying to create some kind of visual masterpiece, but they're never able to quite do it? They've never been given that job or get their foot in the door. And then they see this, airing on a primetime channel, one of the most popular shows on that primetime channel. And to rebut the one and only excuse that might come up for this, the episode is not entirely in the dark. Oh good, this episode has 3 minutes of actual animation instead of the 11 that it should. Seriously, if you pay someone to paint your house and they only painted like the back of it, would you be paying them full price? Would you even care that they made it that far? At that point, don't even bother. Nice way to show off that Season 8 animation bump, by the way. Look, it annoys me greatly when the hardest working artist on the episode is the paint bucket tool. But the plot, though, this is important for the plot. What about the plot? Because Timmy didn't sleep, he wishes it to be dark for 12 hours straight. You know, there are ways to show a scene in the dark, even in total darkness, without just putting a black piece of cardboard over the camera lens. Normally what people do is give the scene much darker shading, and he uses a lot of dark blues.
This isn't your average everyday darkness. This is advanced darkness.
You might know this technique. It was used by the perennial classic The Fairly OddParents in earlier episodes like Timmy's 2D House of Horror. Timmy's 2D House of Horror is actually a very notable episode, by the way. It's notable because it was actually fucking finished! I'd say that I'd love to see the reanimated version of this episode, but you can't reanimate something that was never animated in the first place. You want me to take this seriously? This? Yeah, even the guy who takes cartoons way too seriously, I guess I found my line. The only way that I'd ever take this kind of work seriously is as a resignation letter. Yes, I'm harping on this. But quite honestly, if you get to harp on anything, it should be this. Just imagine these people working on any other type of job. You know, it's my finest memory dining out. Going to a restaurant, ordering a fancy meal, and getting an empty plate with a sprig of parsley. But fine, because it is my job, I'll give this episode as much benefit of the doubt as I possibly could. Because I will admit, it is something to behold. This episode attempted to achieve the low bar of doing nothing, and it still managed to fuck up what it made. This episode comes across as if it's trying to be a radio show. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's literally the only way in hell that something like this has a prayer of actually working. And it's not something they even came close to attempting. A radio show is, well, a show played on the radio. It sounds obvious, but considering what I'm seeing, there are plenty of people who don't know the obvious. So if you're wondering, radios are what people used before televisions. They were like TVs without a screen. You only got audio out of it, so it was used primarily for music. But people tried to tell news, ads, or talk about the sports. Even before that, though, people told stories on the radio. The most famous one would probably be Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast, for reasons that are largely exaggerated. Audio storytelling is a different medium from visual storytelling, like you might see on a television show, which is why this episode fails from conception. Audio storytelling is good for setting a tone. It can easily hold drama, and it's best used for telling serious and compelling stories. Now, you might have realized this, and if this is an easy thing to forget when you're watching Lights Out, but if you can get past all of that, you'll notice that this is The Fairly OddParents, which has none of those things in its most default episodes. The Fairly OddParents is a comedy show, in which its plots are used to gather gags, which usually rely on its visuals. This isn't the kind of show that it's known for its witty dialogue.
Oh, stairs! Then I must be in the living room. Man, that was a long fall.
You know when slapstick humor doesn't work? When you can't fucking see it!
Gee, sorry, son. I just waxed the stairs and added more of them.
This reminds me of when my parents said I couldn't play video games and that I had to use my imagination instead. Oh yeah, you can't watch a cartoon, you have to use your imagination instead. You know, it's at times like this where I would explain exactly what's wrong with this, but I'd end up saying something like, visual type humor needs visuals. It's like, no shit, Sherlock. Who the fuck doesn't understand something so bare basics? You don't need any education to know this most simplest of facts. It's not even fundamental. It's what you need to know before you can even begin the fundamentals. A kindergartner could probably explain this basic fact to you. Then you watch Lights Out from Fairly OddParents. Seriously, am I just so detached from the world that this just seems obvious to me and no one else?
What happened to the light? Is it a power outage or an eclipse?
This is Chet Betcha saying it's not a power outage and your eyes are open.
See, that there? Chet's line should have been, it's not a power outage or an eclipse. Wow, you guys really wanted to can this turd. It couldn't take 1 second to proofread it or get another take. I know that was the line that Chet was supposed to say because it's basic Fairly OddParents writing formula, just repeating the same shit back to back. See how Timmy's house is in the same place for a brief moment that they actually bothered to animate something?
Sorry, son. I moved our house to the top of a hill because the view is so much better.
So, you finally come.
Yes, I am here to seek your wisdom. I've come across a problem that I just can't understand no matter how much I think about it.
Well, what is it? You have come to access my infinite wisdom.
Please tell me, how does a cartoon episode with no animation have an animation error?
I must meditate on this. Give me a moment.
One eternity later.
I've got it! Everyone involved had absolutely no clue what they were doing! Oh, and he's gone.
So, towards the end of the episode, random things start happening in a quick and cartoonish pace that have no semblance of any actual reality within the Fairly OddParents or not. Hey, you know what improved that episode of Ed, Edd, and Eddy? 1 + 1 = Ed? If the only thing in that episode that was animated was everyone's eyes. Crocker in this scene is being hung by a helicopter. He flies up. He is then torn apart by saber-toothed tigers that follow him into the sky. I'm not a paleontologist, but from what I know, saber-toothed tigers can't fly. Just because it's in darkness doesn't mean it's not a plot hole. This kind of stuff actually makes the whole thing even worse. It's like they erased the entire animation specifically so nothing would have to obey any of the known laws of continuity. Actually, no. In all reality, they probably did this so they could have a bunch of gags that, probably shouldn't be in the Fairly OddParents. Like bodies mentioning to be lacerated, Crocker getting his eyes ripped out, Timmy's dad being naked for no fucking reason.
And I picked a bad time to smear my naked body in cat food!
Dad's naked?
Oh, so by the way, that reminds me, every character in this episode is the most unlikable possible. Tootie tries to knock Timmy out with a fucking oar, specifically to make him unconscious. Oh, and Cosmo and Wanda, being the loving godparents they are, try to run Timmy over with a goddamn truck and train just because they were pretending to be scary fairies.
You guys were only pretending to be scary fairies?
Yep. You needed to learn your lesson about scaring Poof.
Right, that's a very important lesson for Timmy to learn. Can I see you try to run him over with a truck again? Right, now hit him with a train.
Oh no! Train!
Now pick him up in an airplane, please.
Prepare for takeoff!
Right, Timmy absolutely needs to learn to not scare people. This is an entirely proportional punishment to making a baby cry from a scary story. I'm gonna say it. I've never watched another cartoon episode, hell, experienced other single piece of media that stated, I don't give a shit as much as this episode. This is the literal bottom of the barrel in that regard, and it is literally one of the worst things that I have ever watched. Nothing about this works. That's because it is nothing! I'd say that this episode is laziness, but it's more like advanced laziness. I'd want an answer as to why anything about this is anything, but pardon the pun, I'd rather be left in the dark, because getting an answer could only serve to piss me off more. There's only two options here. This is either a brazen showcase of I don't give a fuck, or a clusterfuck of massive incompetence. Look, maybe it's hard to understand my, unmitigated rage about this. When it comes to the worst pieces of media ever, they're usually unbelievably disgusting, tastelessly offensive, or unbearably annoying. But all that stuff, believe it or not, takes effort. It takes some kind of skill to pull off. It's kind of why Pet Sitter Pat is a worse episode to me than One Course Meal, as of this time at least. One Course Meal is incredibly offensive with how tactlessly it deals with the concept of suicide, but to give it its credit, it at least tried to tell a story unlike any other SpongeBob episode. Meanwhile, Pet Sitter Pat just jacks the same plot as a pal for Gary, and brings nothing new to the table besides replacing Puffy Fluffy with Patrick. And I've seen Patrick be an arrogant prick in other episodes. And this kind of laziness gets worse when you've actually seen how hard that people actually work to make good animation. Good anything! Lights Out is not something that should be made by professionals. It's not something that should be made by amateurs. Forget professionals. This is the most offensive thing that you could put in an episode. Contempt for your audience. This episode thinks that you're a moron. Each and every one of you. This episode thinks that you don't care that the characters are all fiercely out of character. This episode thinks that you have less than a 2-second memory. This episode thinks that you won't care that 80% or more of it is just the character's eyes on a black screen. This is the worst Fairly OddParents episode because you could not make one worse. Even if you actively tried to. Because then you'd be actively trying to do something. And that would put you leagues ahead of wherever this one came from. There is only one positive thing that I could say about this. It had more time and effort put into it than whatever Waxus became. Maybe that's where the budget of this episode went. Quite honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case.